You're 22 now. What do you imagine? How would you like life to be when you're 32? Where do you see yourself?
I'm gonna be living up in the hills.
Shout out to Faith.
Barbara Streisand type, you know.
The fact that Bad Boy was such a powerful movement, and I really didn't know at the time how big a movement I was a part of.
They called her the First Lady of Bad Boy, but what Faith Evans really became was the blueprint for how silence gets weaponized in the music industry. For almost 30 years, Faith Evans stood next to Diddy through the success, through the scandals, and through the death of her husband, Biggie Smalls.
He was tragically, right? A drive-by shooting?
Yes.
Never solved?
Unsolved.
Do you think it was a purposeful drive-by shooting or an accidental drive-by shooting? No idea?
We absolutely believe it was purposeful.
But now, as lawsuits and federal investigations threaten to bring down everything Diddy built, Faith's carefully chosen words are finally being re-examined. And what she didn't say is more powerful than anything she ever sang.
Puffy has been making money off of Biggie's name for longer than Biggie was alive. People keep forgetting he hadn't turned 25 yet. He was still 24 when he died.
This isn't just about music. It's about what it cost to stay loyal, what it took to survive, and how one of hip-hop's most respected voices learned to escape the very empire she helped build before it crushed her too. Because the real question isn't what did Faith know? It's how long did she have to keep quiet just to stay alive in the game? You see, Faith Evans walked into a trap disguised as an opportunity. When Diddy signed her as Bad Boy's first female artist in 1994, she thought she was joining a revolutionary movement that would change hip-hop forever. What she actually signed up for was a system designed to extract maximum value from her talent while keeping her financially and emotionally dependent on the man who controlled every aspect of her career. Faith was a classically trained vocalist from Newark with a church background and real musical integrity. Her debut album showcased that could carry both vulnerability and power, establishing her as more than just another R&B singer. The chemistry between her artistry and Diddy's production created something magical, but that magic came with strings attached that would strangle her creative and financial freedom for decades.
Puffy gave you your start, now P. Diddy.
Yes.
Well, how do you think of him? P. Diddy or
I still
Puffy?
call him Puff.
You still call him Puff? So he gave you your start and you're still great friends?
Yeah, I actually saw him the other night.
What makes Faith's description of their working relationship so significant is what she's carefully not revealing. When she talks about Diddy, she seems to be protecting herself from legal consequences. What she can't talk about is the dynamic where her artistic input was consistently undervalued and her business acumen was deliberately kept in the dark. The reality was far more calculated than those diplomatic words suggest. Diddy wasn't just producing her music. He was engineering a system where Faith's success would always benefit him more than it benefited her. The contracts were structured to maximize his control while minimizing her leverage. The creative process was designed to make her dependent on his approval and guidance, even when her instincts pointed in different directions. And while Faith was building what she believed was a mutual artistic partnership, Diddy was constructing something entirely different, a business model that would allow him to profit from her talent, her grief, and eventually her silence about how the machine really worked behind the glossy exterior. The stakes for Faith couldn't have been higher. The music industry in the 1990s was particularly hostile to Black women, who faced systematic exclusion from executive positions and ownership opportunities. In this environment, where female artists were rarely seen as valuable beyond their hit-making potential, Diddy represented something extraordinary: direct access to the industry's highest levels and the promise of building something lasting and meaningful. But what Faith was actually getting was a sophisticated form of creative and financial control disguised as opportunity and family. It all began in 1994. Faith Evans, a young but seasoned vocalist with gospel roots and a pen sharp enough to write for Mary J. Blige, was introduced to Sean Puffy Combs, better known today as Diddy. At the time, Diddy had just launched Bad Boy Records, fresh off his departure from Uptown Records. He was hungry, ambitious, already building an empire, and he saw something in Faith that most didn't. She wasn't flashy, she didn't chase fame, but the voice was undeniable. Faith became the first female artist signed to Bad Boy, a move that spoke volumes. It was a label built around brash talent like Craig Mack and the notorious B.I.G., a testosterone-heavy lineup. And yet, here came Faith with her honey-drenched vocals and emotional depth, bringing balance to the sound Diddy was sculpting. Her debut album, Faith, dropped in 1995. Songs like You Used to Love Me and Soon as I Get Home weren't just hits, they were moments. The blend of classic R&B with the hip-hop edge became a defining feature of Bad Boy's catalog, and behind those hits was a powerful collaboration between Faith and Diddy. At the time, it all felt like magic. Faith wasn't just a singer, she was an architect of the Bad Boy sound. Her voice helped elevate the label's image, providing an emotional counterbalance to the hard street narratives coming from Biggie and others. And then came the personal twist. Faith married the notorious B.I.G. just weeks after meeting him. Two artists on the same label, caught up in a whirlwind romance that would later become one of hip-hop's most complicated love stories. That union only tightened the web between Faith, Diddy, and Bad Boy. It wasn't just music anymore, it was family, business, legacy. But the dream came crashing down in 1997. Biggie was in Los Angeles, a tragedy that stunned the world. Faith, now a widow and mother, was shattered. The grief was unbearable. And though the world mourned with her, only Faith knew what it cost her to sing through the pain. Following Biggie's untimely passing, Sean Diddy Combs didn't disappear into mourning. He didn't pull back from the spotlight. He stepped further into it, fast, with precision, almost like he had been preparing. Biggie's face was suddenly everywhere, on t-shirts, on magazine covers, in music videos, in glossy tribute specials. His voice echoed through television commercials and posthumous albums. From all sides, the world was mourning big, but somehow the image of Diddy was always nearby, and in some cases front and center. Faith, still grieving, was pulled back into the studio by Diddy. He asked her to record I'll Be Missing You, a tribute to Biggie set to the melody of the Police's Every Breath You Take.
Every single day and time I pray I'll be missing you.
The song was raw and emotional. It became an instant hit. It topped the charts for weeks, and it made millions. But behind the scenes, things weren't as poetic. In her memoir, Faith confessed she wasn't ready. Emotionally, she was still broken. She had just lost her husband, yet Diddy pressed on. The business had to keep moving. And even though Faith delivered one of the most hauntingly beautiful vocals of her career, she later revealed she wasn't fairly credited or compensated for it. The tribute may have touched millions, but to Faith, it felt transactional. She had poured her grief into a microphone while someone else cashed the checks. And she wasn't the only one who noticed. Years later, singer Jaguar Wright publicly accused Diddy of exploiting Biggie's legacy. In one interview, she said what many had only whispered,
Puffy has been making money off of Biggie's name for longer than Biggie was alive. People keep forgetting he hadn't turned 25 yet. He was still 24 when he died.
It was a bold claim, but hard to ignore. Biggie had lived for 24 years, yet over 25 years after his death, his name was still being used to generate revenue. Tribute concerts, re-released albums, documentaries, clothing lines, anniversary specials, and almost every time Diddy was listed as executive producer or creative director. It raised a painful question. Was Biggie being honored or monetized? Artists like 112, Total, and Mace participated in the tributes, but Faith noticed the pattern. The tributes were polished productions. The grief looked more like branding, and the spotlight, no matter the event, seemed to always drift back to Diddy. The man who had once called Biggie his brother was now building a billion-dollar empire using his image. Faith played along because she had to. She was a mother, a widow, a woman trying to survive in a ruthless industry, but her heart was never fully in it. She sang the songs, she smiled for the cameras, but behind the performance was a quiet ache, a knowing, a realization that her husband's memory had become a brand and someone else was controlling it. She never said much publicly, at least not at first, but her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. In the music business, speaking out can get you blackballed, ridiculed, or worse. So Faith kept her thoughts to herself, letting time and patterns speak for her. But fans began to notice, so did insiders, the tribute albums, the remixes, the carefully timed documentaries. One by one, the puzzle pieces fell into place, and the image became clearer. Faith Evans had lost her husband, but she had also witnessed something far more disturbing, the way grief can be marketed, monetized, and manipulated by those in power. and she never forgot it. Faith Evans had already seen how grief could be turned into a product. I'll Be Missing You was supposed to be a tribute. Instead, it became her first lesson in how pain, especially black pain, was profitable in Diddy's world. And as the years went by, Faith started to realize Biggie's death wasn't the only thing being exploited. So was her life, her voice, her trust. At first, it was subtle. The success was undeniable. Platinum plaques, sold-out shows, chart-topping singles. Bad Boy was a machine, and Faith was one of its brightest stars. But behind all the glitz, she began noticing cracks. The royalty checks didn't match the radio spins. Her name wasn't always in the credits. The math never quite added up. She wasn't the only one doing the math. The pattern was there. Diddy had created a label filled with young, hungry artists. Faith, 112, Total, the LOX, Mace. All of them chasing dreams and trusting the man who claimed to make them reality. But once the hits stopped, those same artists found themselves confused, broke, or bound by contracts they barely understood. Faith, like many of them, had signed her original contract young, excited, and with little legal guidance. The language was dense, the terms were long, and by the time she realized just how unfavorable the deal was, the damage had already been done. She never launched a public attack. That wasn't her style. But if you listen closely to her interviews from the mid-2000s, the message is there, just beneath the surface. She talked about unfair splits, about feeling overlooked, about pouring her soul into records that didn't pay her back. She was diplomatic, yes, but disappointed, and it showed. Others weren't as quiet. Mace, one of Bad Boy's biggest breakout stars, came out swinging. He accused Diddy of deliberately holding on to his publishing rights and refusing to release him from old contracts.
30, I gave 30% all back to him before the 750. So he got 750 and the 30 back. I never had any of his publishing.
Then came the LOX, who aired their frustrations live on New York radio, accusing Diddy of robbing them and manipulating the system to keep their music under his control. Mark Curry, another former artist, went even further, writing an entire book about how Diddy used artists up and tossed them aside. Faith watched it all happen, and while she never added fuel to the fire, she began to make quiet moves of her own. She distanced herself, slowly, methodically. She stopped appearing at Bad Boy reunions. She turned down collaborations. She carved out her own space, one where she could sing on her own terms, even if the spotlight was smaller. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about clarity. Faith had seen what happened when you let someone else steer your career, when you let loyalty blind you to bad business, when you mistake family for ownership. She began to reclaim her name, her story, her worth. In hindsight, Faith's silence was its own kind of rebellion. In an industry that rewards drama and confrontation, she chose dignity. She didn't scream. She didn't drag anyone on social media. But her absence from Diddy's orbit spoke volumes. She had once helped build the house that Bad Boy stood on. She had sacrificed, endured, and trusted. And when it all came full circle, she walked away with the most valuable thing of all, her voice, and the freedom to use it however she chose. What hurt the most, she later implied, wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. The realization that the man she once saw as a musical partner, maybe even a friend, had seen her more as a business move, a voice to brand, a name to boost his own. And like so many others, she had learned too late that in Diddy's empire, loyalty didn't always go both ways. By the time Faith Evans started pulling back from the Bad Boy machine, another tension, more personal, more public, was starting to boil over. Lil Kim. The two women were never friends. They were rivals from the moment they stepped into Biggie's orbit. But the rivalry wasn't just about music. It was about love, legacy, and betrayal. And as Faith was slowly realizing how much she had lost to the business, she also had to face how much she had lost in her marriage. To another woman Diddy never stopped promoting. Lil Kim had been Biggie's protege. She was young, fiery, and unapologetically raunchy. Everyone around them knew there was more than just studio time between her and Big. Faith had always suspected, and over time she confirmed it. Their affair wasn't a rumor, it was real. And for Faith, that betrayal cut deeper than anything in the music industry ever could.
I remember when you wrote your book, she described how you walked in the bedroom on your husband in bed with Lil Kim.
But instead of dealing with it privately, the music world turned it into a spectacle. The grieving widow and the grieving mistress. Both signed to Bad Boy. Both expected to perform, smile, and show up to the same events. Diddy didn't separate them. He kept pushing them forward, promoting their careers side by side, putting them in the same spaces, releasing tribute records, and building the mythology of Bad Boy around Biggie's memory and the drama of the two women left behind. It was the perfect storm, messy, emotional, and easy to sell. Faith believed Lil Kim disrespected Big's legacy. She didn't just mourn him, she branded herself through him. Photo shoots, interviews, lyrics that referenced their affair, public tears that felt to Faith more like PR than pain. Faith had married Biggie, bore his child, and buried him. But in the years that followed, it felt like Kim was being handed the bigger stage. And through all of this, Diddy stood silent. He never stepped in to mediate, to set boundaries, or to offer clarity. In fact, some say he leaned into it, that he liked the attention, that the feud gave fans something to talk about, something juicy to distract from the contracts, the unpaid royalties, and the growing backlash from other Bad Boy artists. It was easier to focus on the women fighting over Big than to ask why so many of his friends and collaborators were now struggling or gone. The feud spilled into the music. Lil Kim took jabs in her verses. Faith responded in her own subtle way. Their glances on red carpets were cold. Their interviews dripped with coded language, shade wrapped in grief. Fans picked sides. Media fueled the fire. And all the while, the one person who had truly connected them both, Biggie, wasn't there to explain or defend either of them. Diddy, he kept his hands clean, publicly neutral, privately in control. He continued building the Bad Boy brand using both their names, their pain, their story. And the more the drama unfolded, the more money it made. To Faith, it felt cruel. She had already been betrayed once by her husband. Now, she was being betrayed again by the machine that used that pain for profit. She wasn't just fighting for her name, she was fighting for how Biggie would be remembered, not as some playboy with two women at war, but as a man, a father, a husband, an artist. The world saw two women clawing at each other. What it didn't see was how the system that tied them together, Diddy's system, benefited from every headline. And while the public devoured the drama, Faith quietly backed away, one step at a time, holding on to the one thing neither Kim nor Diddy could touch, the truth of what really happened behind closed doors. For years, the public only saw the surface. Two women locked in a feud, Bad Boy Records still printing hits, and Diddy standing at the center like a proud orchestrator. But behind that chaos was a much darker design. Faith eventually realized that the conflict, the contracts, the silences, it had all been part of a larger pattern. What she lived through wasn't just personal heartbreak, it was systemic. And by the time the lawsuits hit and the public started asking real questions, Faith had already known the truth for decades. Because what she experienced wasn't just drama, it was a warning that most people ignored until it was too late. By 2024, the illusion of Bad Boy Records as a brotherhood or a musical family had officially shattered. What used to be seen as one of the most influential hip-hop collectives of the 90s had become the subject of federal investigations, explosive lawsuits, and public reckonings that no longer allowed Sean Diddy Combs to hide behind designer suits and platinum plaques. The whispers Faith Evans had lived with for decades about missing royalties, manipulative contracts, and a system built on exploitation were no longer whispers. They were headlines. And for the first time, the world was catching up to what Faith had known all along. She had seen the early signs, the money that never added up, the grief turned into profit, the constant emotional gaslighting disguised as mentorship, the way Diddy positioned himself as both savior and puppeteer, lifting you up while quietly tightening the chains. It was a system designed to reward loyalty only if it came with silence. And Faith, despite everything, had always known how dangerous it could be to speak too soon or too loudly. But she also knew how to protect herself. Unlike Mace, the LOX, Mark Curry, even Cassie, who fought back publicly, Faith chose a different path. She didn't run to the press. She didn't sue. She didn't air every detail, but she also didn't forget. Instead, she pulled back, slowly, quietly, deliberately. She began rebuilding her career away from the bad boy spotlight, away from Diddy's orbit, and away from the chaos that had swallowed so many others. And when the lawsuits started piling up in 2023 and 2024, accusations of STFing, abuse, coercion, and intimidation, Faith didn't flinch because she had already lived through the early stages of that storm. She knew what it felt like to be emotionally manipulated, financially undercut, and expected to stay grateful for the opportunity. Faith's silence had never been passive. It was survival. And now, as Diddy faces what could be the final chapter of his career, Faith stands untouched. Not because she escaped the system, but because she understood it. While others were trapped in contracts they couldn't escape, Faith had slowly carved out her own lane. She learned the hard way, but she learned. She built her own teams, launched her own projects, and took control of her catalog. She started releasing music on her terms, writing books on her terms, and making public appearances when it felt right, not when the machine demanded it. Her 2008 memoir, Keep the Faith, pulled back the curtain without ever fully naming names. It was careful, but it was clear. She spoke about the exploitation, the emotional toll, and the calculated moves that kept her from ever truly owning the success she helped create. Critics called it too polite, but now, in retrospect, it was prophetic. In the aftermath of the Cassie lawsuit and the dozens of others that followed, Faith's distance looks less like avoidance and more like wisdom. Her story isn't soaked in scandal because she never let it get that far. She got out when others were still trying to earn one more favor, one more feature, one more hit. And because of that, she still has something many others don't: peace. Today, Faith doesn't do reunion tours with Bad Boy. She doesn't sing I'll Be Missing You on award stages anymore. And when the headlines about Diddy's downfall broke, she didn't comment because she didn't need to. She'd already said what needed to be said, quietly, strategically, and in her own time. And in a world that thrives on spectacle, maybe that's the ultimate power move of all. Anyway, that's it for the video, folks. Bye.